and welcome to India Hangout. We're looking at a tax special along with Business Standard. We're trying to understand 2 or 3 issues in the realm of tax. First is, what should the taxation objective or direction or thrust be in the Union Budget 2014-15 to be announced by the new government? The second is the process of administering tax. It's a very general point, but can we look at some of the issues or themes that may help simplify the process and that thus make life simpler? And finally, of course, what is the way forward? So these are the 3 points we're putting to our guests today. We've got Ajit Ranade, Chief Economist at Aditya Birla Group, Devendra Kumar Pant from India Ratings, and also HP Ranina, lawyer, joining in, as well as Rohit Jain, Partner, Economic Laws and Practice, ELP, joining us in a bit. Let's begin with the general part, which is to do with what should taxation or the thrust of taxation be this budget. Ajit, why don't you go first?
Yeah, Govind, the overall stance, I think, should remain anti-inflationary, because everybody knows that the highest priority is inflation right now in the short run, and therefore the budget should not contribute to that inflationary stance, which means that basically we are looking at no increase in tax rates, at least no significant increase in tax rates, and revenue to be garnered mostly from non-tax sources. I would be looking at that as the basic signal.
Right. Okay.
As far as second,
yeah, go ahead.
Fiscal consolidation. Let me just make so inflation and fiscal consolidation. So fiscal deficit, of course, is going to be higher than what was projected in the interim budget, but that does not mean it should be plugged using only tax methods. I think non-tax revenue and wherever possible expenditure cuts, but that we can come to later.
Right, got it. Okay, Mr. H.P. Ranina, Supreme Court lawyer, has also joined us. Mr. Ranina, what's your sense? I mean, we said that there are 3 themes that we want to really pose our questions around. One is to do with what should be the thrust overall, given where we are as an economy, given all the other administrative issues. And secondly, what is the process that should be followed in order to do this, in order to make life better for those who pay tax or those on whom tax is administered?
Well, these are 2 separate issues. One is, of course, the finance minister is going to bring about fiscal consolidation by bringing down the fiscal deficit, or at least keeping it in check. That's the first priority which he has himself indicated.
Right. And
therefore, I assume that there will be a lot of reduction in subsidies and possibly expenditure in order to bring the fiscal deficit down to a reasonable level. Of course, it will be higher than what was projected, but I think it will give the roadmap or a lower amount of fiscal deficit. So this is the first thing which he will do: use the subsidies to some extent, ask for more disinvestment proceeds, and then, of course, he will try to bring down the fiscal deficit to a reasonable level. Now, coming to your second question as to what needs to be done as far as the taxpayers are concerned, I think again, his scope for reducing the tax rates is very, very low. So I don't think it's going to do that. But possibly it will widen the tax rates. Currently, as you know, the first 10% is applicable on the slab between 5 lakhs and 2 lakhs. So that 5 lakhs will go up to maybe 7 lakhs. It will become 7 lakhs. And maybe the initial exemption limit may be increased to 2.4 lakhs. So that a person earning 20,000 rupees a month will not have to pay any income tax. Then, of course, the second slab, again, he may increase it from 5, he may increase it from 2 to 7. And 30% tax he may impose on maybe become over 14 or 15 lakhs. So that is what I expect him to do. I also expect him to give some incentive for savings. And therefore, I expect the EPC benefit, which is currently 1 lakh rupees, will be hiked by him.
Right. Right. Okay. Devendra Kumar, you're also, I mean, again, you would, I'm guessing, look at it from a larger macroeconomic perspective. But what's your sense directionally in terms of what the government should be doing when it presents, or the finance minister should be doing or focusing on when he presents his budget on the 10th of July? Right. I think we've lost Devendra Kumar Jain. Ajit, let me come back to you on the 2 points that you were making. And if we were to build, let's say, further and get into the indirect tax regime, what are the kind of, again, directionally, what are you expecting and what needs to be done in some ways urgently?
Yeah, urgently. I mean, on the indirect tax front, remember, we still have an incomplete withdrawal of the stimulus. Remember, excise rate drastically cut and they were partially brought back. So hopefully we can keep them where they are. And as I said, income tax rates, let's not change any rates at all. If at all, you can give some relief at the lower end in terms of tax slabs. So what I'm looking for is an ambitious target on disinvestment of something like 50,000 crores or even higher.
Okay.
And secondly, there's a small technical issue of spectrum swapping with the defense. You know, defense and commerce, the telecom, have this issue of a spectrum swap years. And that potentially can unlock a huge value because the government gets recurring revenue share from telecom sector, and that helps telecom growth. That also will help telecom auction values. There's a spectrum auction coming up later this year. So that, to my mind, I think the calculation, the present value of that is almost 1 lakh crores.
1 lakh crores, and how much would, I mean, annually, or is this one-off?
No, this is the net present value. Somebody said it could be between 1 and 2 lakh crores.
Okay.
But what it does is that right now, because of the non-contiguity, it hampers the growth of telecom,
right,
and there is no downside for defense. And let me also point out that we have this, fortunately, the person who is the finance minister of the country is also the defense minister. Right. So he can make it happen.
Okay. Mr. Ranina, you know, one of the big issues that most investors have been pointing to, and multinationals, has been the whole tax problem with Vodafone. So let me quote, for instance, what Finance Minister Arun Jaitley also said. He said that very recently, he said that people refer to India as a as a place where there is tax terrorism and policy paralysis, and there has to be a tax regime that allows businesses to grow. So he was speaking to a group of chartered accountants a few days ago. So does this mean that we will finally have some clarity on which way this whole retrospective tax regime will be treated?
I think the finance minister will make an announcement that hereafter there will be no retrospective amendment. The own committee report. It said that except in the very sort of rare cases. But the question is whether he will roll back what was done by Pranab Mukherjee in 2012, because that will make a dent on his tax revenues. He's already budgeted for a certain amount of revenue, which is running into almost 13,000, 14,000 crores. Now, the question is whether it's going to roll back with retrospective effect, or whether it's going to make an announcement only saying that prospectively I will not make any retrospective amendments. But the important point is, Finance Minister should say that hereafter he will not do anything for the mere purpose of superseding court decisions. As you know, in the Finance Act 2012, 80% of the amendments were only meant to supersede court decisions. Now, somehow the Finance Minister has to come up and say that no, he is not going to do that, and he is going to respect the judiciary, and therefore whatever amendments he makes will only be prospective, and only in the rarest of rare cases will it be something which will override or supersede court decisions.
So, Rohit Jain, let me come to you. I think we lost you a little earlier. What's your sense, and in terms of what needs to be done in the budget from a tax point of view? I'm not sure whether you want to take on the direct or the indirect tax aspects.
Let's look at it both. In terms of the indirect tax, clearly what industry is looking at it is clear roadmap for the most important significant tax reform is GST.
Right.
Many ministers have come in and been tried to get a date, and it's been postponed thereafter.
Right.
What industry is really looking at it, there should be clear roadmap for the GST which they are looking at, and what steps that government will take care when it really looking for the implementation of GST.
Right.
And in terms of the direct tax, again the DTC is one thing, but apart from that, investors today in India are really not getting the certainty on the tax position in the country. Today, with the retrospective amendments, we had the challenges in the past that investors are not really looking for the not getting certainty. Clearly, the certainty on the tax policies and the tax position is the way to look at for the minister.
Right. Rohit, if you look at some of the pronouncements of the government in the last few weeks, including, let's say, raising railway tariffs and so on, does it give you a sense that the government is likely to take a few hard decisions?
It will take what's happening in that's what had happened in few years back. We have taken a one step forward in the service tax levy, where they have introduced negative list regime of service tax.
Yeah.
So what has happened is that the tax base has gone up, the tax rates have already gone up, but not with corresponding SENVAT credit. So industry is having anyway the issues in terms of the tax rates, the tax base, the tax cost is going up, with not giving the corresponding SENVAT and removing the cascading effect. What needs to be done, while he may take some hard steps on the output side in terms of the taxes, he may still look at it the SENVAT position being clearly a systematic position. No issues in terms of removing the cascading effect of taxes.
Right.
Is what really he needs to really take a step forward.
Right. Ajit, can I come back to you on that? If you were to look at some of the pronouncements of the government in the last few weeks, ever since it's come on, including streamlining, shrinking government, so to speak, at the cabinet level, what does this tell you of what could be done and what perhaps then can be done?
Yeah, on shrinking government, or at least sort of putting ministries in clusters, I think we have a very good sign. For example, power and renewable energy, environment, all in a cluster. That's a very good sign. We also have no announcement on the planning commission. So all the capital grants, or I guess they will now be the conduit will be finance ministry.
Yeah.
That also got an example of a shrinking government. But I must say that the announcement on the railway fare hike, even though I guess it was the previous government's decision or justified on the basis of increased spending on safety and modernization, that coupled with the increase in import duty on sugar, and then of course the sort of routine in price of petrol and diesel. So all these decisions, of course, are going to contribute to inflation. So I think the government needs to be extra vigilant. Of course, now there are all kinds of administrative orders against borders. But as I said, I keep repeating that inflation, we must not let inflation get out of control, inflationary expectation. And thankfully, I think now there are signs of monsoon. But until we get the inflation rate down to a reasonably acceptable level, I think that's a priority.
Mr. Ranina, one of the other issues that has been hanging over successive governments is appeals and litigation. Are you expecting anything, or would you? Is there something that you would think the government can use its clout in some ways because of of the political clout to get things done and get things moving, or is this sort of independent of all of that?
So there was a press report only yesterday that about 4,000 crore rupees worth of litigation will be sorted out. The CBDT has been given instructions that within the next 6 months we somehow come up with a way to settle these issues. And I think what needs to be done is we need more courts. Today, unfortunately, even in the Supreme Court, matters are not being heard on a regular basis as far as tax is concerned. And very few matters come up for final hearing. The result is that people do not know exactly what the law is on certain contentious issues. So the government needs to request the Supreme Court to set up a special bench to hear tax matters on a case basis. The second important thing needs to be done is that the National Tax Tribunal was constituted by an Act of Parliament. And that Act of Parliament was passed almost 5 years ago. Until today, the UPA did not set up the National Tax Tribunal. The advantage of the National Tax Tribunal is that all the pending matters in the High Court are then to be heard by the National Tax Tribunal on a day-by-day basis. And therefore, there would be immediate disposal of cases which are today pending in the High Court of India. So the National Tax Tribunal needs to be set up as early as possible. And if that is done, then I think a lot of issues can be sorted out overnight.
So, Mr. Ranade, just a clarificatory question. So, the National Tax Tribunal will sit above the appellate tribunals, or how does it link?
So, National Tax Tribunal to take over all the matters which are pending in the High Courts. As you know, we have 24, 25 High Courts. So, from the Income Tax Tribunal on a question of law, matters go to the High Court. Now, the High Court benches are not functioning regularly. So, there's a lot of pendency in the High Court. Now, if all these pending matters in the High Court are transferred to the National Tax Tribunal, which will have special judges, then matters will get disposed of very fast. And therefore, the litigation will come to an end and recoveries can be made in the shortest possible time. So I hope that this is a matter to be considered not only by the Finance Minister but also by the Law Minister, because the National Tax Tribunal has to be set up by the Law Minister. Therefore, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad should also take an active interest to make sure that the National Tax Tribunal is set up in the shortest possible time.
Right. So National Tax Tribunal as a way to transfer all the cases that are pending in the high courts and create one unified body and thus speed up, of course, the process of administration of tax. Rohit, Jain, are there any other specific areas that you're looking at where you feel on the administration and the process of collecting tax can be speeded up or has been pending for a long time?
Yes, I think another concern for the industry is clearly the prosecution power given to the tax authorities. Few years back, Supreme Court of our country has held that in terms of the tax matters, the prosecution or criminal prosecution should not be there. So it can be cured by paying tax and the penalties and the interest. They have taken step forward and again introduced the prosecution power in some of the offences. This has been used at a ground level, very surprisingly, where they are trying to take the prosecution power and recover the some of the tax payments, which the investigation is still on. Clearly, finance ministers still look at those sections, relook at those provisions, and see to it that it has been used only in exceptional cases and not as a regular scenario to collect the more revenue for the government.
So, Rohit, you feel that this has been used unfairly in the last year or so, or the last couple of years?
At least there have been various threats given by the investigating authority that we will use this power if you don't pay the tax at the investigation stage. That's where it becomes difficult for the industries, and moreover when we are wanting to attract the foreign direct investment in the country and we have this sort of powers given to the tax investigation authorities for the prosecute,
yes,
it would become difficult in terms of attracting those investment in the country.
Right. Ajit, let me come back to you. From a larger investment climate point of view, and we've got one is the Vodafone case that we just touched upon, but there are other cases where also there's been a hue and cry about the nature. I mean, the nature of the cases and the larger philosophy behind it, which is, what does government exist for? Why does the tax department exist, and in what manner should the tax department be carrying out the duties? Is there a philosophy issue that we need to look at as well when it comes to really looking at how tax can be collected and distributed or redistributed?
See, one of the main components of India, main members of India is the BJP, and the BJP's own manifesto before the election mentioned the word tax terrorism. So clearly, this is a word and this is a concept very, very something that the government is very much aware of. Secondly, as I think the previous speaker, Mr. Ranina, also mentioned, almost 4 lakh crores is stuck due to disputes of various kinds. So there is a scope for an executive action. I mean, the National Tax Tribunal, of course, is to take care of pending high court cases, but there is an executive action opportunity to, in one stroke, dismiss cases which are below a particular threshold. Let's say if the disputed amount is less than 20 lakh rupees, and if the matter is more than, say, 5 or 7 years old, then in one stroke declare them to be deemed to be settled at the level of the tribunal, the income tax tribunal. So that itself will unlock a huge amount of, I think, substantial amount of locked money. Plus, it will also give a signal to the investors and taxpayers that the pending matters are being taken care of. As far as the high-profile cases like Vodafone are concerned, I believe the right approach would be to perhaps set up a high-powered panel, perhaps maybe under Dr. Shom, and sit across the table to sort it out, in a out of the court kind of a way. I don't think the government is in a position to promise forever that there will be no retrospective amendment, because there are situations where you need to do retrospective amendments to regularize certain anomalies.
Sure.
But certainly, no retrospective amendments simply to defeat a court judgment.
Right.
So those kind of signals will go a long way, I think. And of course, ultimately, the principle of lower taxes, lesser exemptions, and simpler code. That's the medium to long-term objective. I mean, whether the GST and TTC, if they incorporate these principles, it would be wonderful for investors.
Right. So, Mr. Ranina, if we were to take a step back and say, okay, what is the philosophy of collecting, administering tax going to be, or should it be? And should it be different from the past? And how can it be visibly different to the people who pay tax, whether it's businesses or individuals? What can the government do there, or the finance minister do there?
Well, what I would suggest is that in this country, The government, the tax officers are making the mistake of trying to assess the true income of a taxpayer. They cannot do it. The Indians are such a fertile mind that nobody will be able to really find out what is the real income of a taxpayer. Therefore, we have to move towards a simple presumptive form of taxation, which has already been enforced in India and which has been very successful in not having any litigation whatsoever. For example, there are certain provisions which say that a certain percentage of your turnover, currently it is 8%, certain percentage of your turnover will be presumed to be your income. That's not the tax. That's only the presumed income. Therefore, you don't have to maintain books of accounts, records, documents. You just have to maintain a record of your gross receipts and turnover, and a percentage of that is your presumed income. On that, you will pay the tax at the applicable rate. So the tax rate comes to about 3%, 4% of the turnover. Now we have found that this is excellent because people love to pay this type of tax because then you don't have to go into all the hassles. Because people don't mind paying taxes. Today, a country like India with 125 crore people has ridiculously low levels of taxpayers who actually pay tax. The tax to GDP ratio is falling. Now you've got to widen the tax base by making it very simple for people to pay their taxes, to comply with the law, with no questions asked. You just go on the basis of the turnover, and the same figure of turnover which is used for the goods and services tax or for that will also be done so that there's harmonization between direct and indirect taxation. And based on the turnover, you presume a certain amount of income and then you levy the tax. Believe you me, lot of unaccounted transactions will disappear. Black money will become white money. There will be no litigation. Only people who stand to lose are the chartered accountants and lawyers whose taxes will go down. But apart from that, it will tremendously benefit the government. Revenues will come up. Let me give a simple illustration. If even 10 crore people pay an average amount of 15,000 rupees a year by way of taxes, we are talking of 150,000 crores. So you have to recover money in a very simple way with no questions asked, and people will voluntarily comply. And that's how you will widen the tax base and increase the tax GDP.
Right. So a call once again to simplify the base, make it attractive for people to pay, and thus enlarge the tax base. Let's see if the government this time does it. As a somewhat radical step. So let's get a quick sum up, and let me come back to Rohit. What are the we started by saying what should be the direction, what should be the process to achieve this direction, and finally, how do we see things going forward? So let me, what's your sense as we sum up? What are the 2 or 3 key areas that you would be watching for or expecting from the budget from a tax point of view?
Clearly simple and certain tax positions. Secondly, the GST and the DTC roadmap. And the most importantly, clearly the faster dispute resolution mechanism is something that we need to really look forward from this budget.
Okay, Ajit, what's your top 2 or 3 takeaways and sort of demands, if one may put it like that?
Well, as I said, focus on keeping this fiscal stance non-inflationary. So no new taxes, no increase in taxes. Perhaps no significant increase in MSP, and perhaps decrease in import duties and so on food items especially. Secondly, a focus on non-tax sources. So an ambitious target for disinvestment, an untangling of tax dispute may be locked up through a telecom tangle. And thirdly, as I said, the principle of predictability, lower taxes, simpler code, perhaps fewer exemptions.
Right. Mr. Ranina, last word.
Yes, I think simple tax law based on presumptive taxation, no harassment of taxpayers, treat the taxpayers as your customers, collect the tax in a very arrogant manner, let the taxpayer regime be very friendly. I think a lot of money will come, litigation has to be avoided at all costs.
Right.
And more importantly, I would also like one point finally, that use the unproductive assets which are locked up in gold for productive purposes, allow gold to be monetized and let that money be used for infrastructure development. I think the monetization of gold and using the money for infrastructure development is the key to the progress of India. That is what the India government wants. They want to have the maximum amount of infrastructure development in the next 5 years.
That's really the ties into the non-tax sources that Ajit was talking about as well. We've run out of time completely. Thank you very much, Mr. Ranina, Ajit Ranade, and Rohit Jain for joining us and taking us through your key expectations from the Union Budget 2014 to be presented on 10th of July. Thank you very much.